I never intended to get caught up in the mystery of St. Catherine's. Back in 2008, I was just a rookie detective in the small city of Oak Ridge, Massachusetts, a place where serious crime was rare enough that a missing bicycle made the local paper. The disappearance of Sisters Margaret and Agnes after their midnight vigil changed everything. For the town, for the church, and especially for me. I remember the morning clearly, May 17, 2008. I was having breakfast at Molly's Diner when my police radio crackled with unusual urgency. Father Thomas from St. Catherine's was reporting 2 missing nuns. The elderly priest's voice trembled as he explained they hadn't returned from their monthly midnight prayer vigil. St. Catherine's was a cornerstone of Oak Ridge, a Gothic revival structure with weathered stone and stained glass that dated back to the late 1800s. When I arrived, the morning sun cast long shadows through the church's arched windows. Father Thomas met me at the entrance, his face drawn with worry. "Detective Mitchell," he said, clutching a worn prayer book. "They're gone. Sisters Margaret and Agnes never returned to the convent. Their beds weren't slept in." The nuns, both in their 60s, had served the parish for over 30 years. Sister Margaret, with her wire-rimmed glasses and perpetual smile, taught at the adjoining school. Sister Agnes, quieter and more severe, managed the church's charity programs. Both were respected fixtures in our community. "They come every month on the 16th, Father Thomas explained as we walked through the empty church. "Midnight to 3 a.m., praying in silence. It's a tradition they've maintained for decades." The church appeared undisturbed. No signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. Their personal items, rosaries, a thermos of tea, reading glasses, remained at the front pew where they always sat. The only unusual detail was a small, leather-bound notebook belonging to Sister Agnes, open to a page with a hastily scribbled note. "We must tell someone about the..." The sentence remained unfinished. I spent that day interviewing everyone connected to the church. No one had seen anything unusual. The security camera at the church entrance showed the sisters arriving at 11:45 p.m. but never leaving. It was as if they had simply vanished into thin air. As weeks passed with no leads, the case consumed me. I checked every hospital, bus station, and homeless shelter within a 100-mile radius. I interviewed former students, parishioners, and distant relatives. Nothing. The FBI joined the investigation, bringing in tracking dogs and forensic specialists. Still nothing. The community rallied. Search parties combed the woods surrounding the church, prayer vigils were held, and reward money was offered. But as months turned into years, the case of the vanished nuns became Oak Ridge's unsolved mystery. A cautionary tale parents told their children, and eventually just another cold case file gathering dust on my desk. I transferred to Boston 3 years later, but the case haunted me through my career. The sisters' faces looked out from a photo I kept in my wallet, a reminder of my first and greatest failure. I never forgot the unfinished sentence in that notebook. "We must tell someone about the..." About what? What secret had the sisters discovered? And what had it cost them? I couldn't have known then that 17 years later, the truth would finally begin to emerge, with a discovery that would pull me back to St. Catherine's and into a mystery deeper than I ever imagined. January 6th, 2025. I was 2 months into retirement, living in a small apartment in Boston, when my phone rang at 3:17 a.m. Waking from a fitful sleep, I fumbled for the receiver, my mind immediately assuming the worst. Late-night calls rarely bring good news, especially to former detectives. "Mitchell," I answered, my voice rough with sleep. "Detective Mitchell?" "It's Chief Warren from Oak Ridge PD." I hadn't heard that voice in years. Warren had been a patrol officer when I left Oak Ridge. "It's about St. Catherine's," he continued, "the nuns." My heart skipped a beat. For 17 years I'd waited for this call. "What happened?" I asked, already reaching for my clothes. "The janitor found something under a pew. We think you should see it." 3 hours later, I was driving through the familiar streets of Oak Ridge. The town had changed. New storefronts, traffic lights, housing developments. But St. Catherine's remained steadfast, its spire piercing the gray winter sky just as it had when I left. Police tape cordoned off the entrance. Chief Warren met me at the steps, snow dusting his shoulders. He was heavier now, with gray at his temples, but the same earnest expression I remembered. "Didn't expect to see you so soon," he said, extending his hand. "Wouldn't have missed it," I replied, following him inside. The church was colder than I remembered, the air stale with incense and old wood. A small cluster of officers stood near the front, surrounding an area where several pews had been moved aside. Among them was a thin man in coveralls, the janitor, I presumed. Warren introduced him as Miguel Ramirez, who had worked at St. Catherine's for nearly 5 years. "Tell him what you found, Miguel," Warren prompted. Miguel nervously wiped his hands on his coveralls. "I was fixing the heating vent under Pew 14, he explained. "It's been making noise for weeks. When I removed the grate, I saw something that didn't belong." He led us to the exposed section of flooring. A small metal box, roughly the size of a hardcover book, had been extracted from beneath the vent. It was made of tarnished brass, with a simple clasp that had been sealed with what looked like candle wax. "We waited for you before opening it," Warren said, "given your history with the case." With gloved hands, I carefully broke the wax seal and lifted the lid. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, identical to the one Sister Agnes had left open the night they disappeared. Beside it was a small voice recorder, an old cassette model, and a sealed envelope with my name written across it in faded blue ink. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the envelope. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, a nun's penmanship, perfected through years of teaching. I carefully opened it and removed a single sheet of paper. "Detective Mitchell," it began. "If you are reading this, then our fears were justified. We have entrusted this box to St. Catherine's, hidden where only God's providence might reveal it when the time is right. The recording contains our testimony. The journal holds the evidence. We pray this finds you, for you were the only one who seemed to truly care about finding the truth. Trust no one until you've heard the whole story. Sister Margaret and Sister Agnes." The date on the letter was May 16, 2008, the very night they disappeared. I looked up at Warren, who was watching me intently. "They knew they were in danger," I said quietly. "They left this deliberately before they vanished." "But why wait 17 years to find it?" Warren asked. Miguel cleared his throat. "The heating system was replaced in 2009. That vent hasn't been opened since before they disappeared." I held the recorder in my palm, this small plastic time capsule containing voices that had been silent for 17 years. What secret had been worth their disappearance? And why had they trusted me, a rookie detective they'd barely known, with their testimony? "I need to listen to this alone," I said finally. "And I need copies of everything before this goes into evidence." Warren nodded, understanding the personal stake I had in this case. "Use my office. Take all the time you need." As I walked out with the box, I couldn't help but feel the weight of 17 years lifting slightly from my shoulders. The sisters hadn't just vanished, they'd left a breadcrumb trail. And finally, after all this time, I had found the first crumb. Chief Warren's office hadn't changed much since my time in Oak Ridge. The same faded motivational posters, the perpetually dripping coffee machine, even the squeaking chair that protested when I sat down. I placed the brass box on the desk, removed the cassette recorder, and examined it carefully. It was a basic model, the kind journalists used before smartphones made them obsolete. The battery compartment showed corrosion, but when I pressed play, the machine whirred to life with surprising vigor. A moment of static, then Sister Margaret's voice emerged, thin and nervous, but unmistakable. "This is Sister Margaret Donahue, recording on May 16, 2008, at St. Catherine's Church in Oak Ridge, Massachusetts. Sister Agnes is with me. We're making this record because we fear we may not be safe after tonight." I closed my eyes, transported back 17 years by her voice. I could picture her perfectly. Gray hair always neatly tucked under her habit, kind eyes behind those wire-rimmed glasses. "It began 3 months ago," she continued, "during renovations of the church basement. Workers discovered a sealed room that wasn't on any building plans. Inside was a lockbox containing financial records dating back to 1967. Sister Agnes's voice cut in, more urgent and harsh than Margaret's. Records that should never have existed. Evidence of money laundering through the diocese. Millions of dollars, detective. Tied to organized crime families in Boston." My eyes snapped open. The Catholic Church in Boston had weathered many scandals, but this was something entirely different. "We took the documents to Bishop Harrington," Margaret continued. "We believed he would help us bring this to the proper authorities, but his reaction," her voice faltered. "He was afraid," Agnes interjected. "Not surprised, afraid. He told us to forget what we'd seen, to return the documents. When we refused, the threats began. The recording detailed how they'd been followed after leaving church functions, how their convent room had been searched, how a black car had nearly run Sister Agnes down in the church parking lot. An accident, according to the driver. We've made copies of everything," Margaret explained. "The originals are hidden separately. In this box, you'll find Sister Agnes's journal detailing everything we've discovered, including names, dates, and amounts. The diocese has been the perfect laundering operation," Agnes added. "Regular cash donations, construction projects with inflated costs, charity programs where money disappears overseas. It's been happening right under everyone's noses for decades." Then Margaret's voice lowered, becoming almost a whisper. "There's something else, detective. Something worse than the money. We found references to a death in 1973, a young woman named Clara Jessup who worked in the diocesan office. Her death was ruled a suicide, but the financial records included a payment to her family, labeled as compensation. We believe she discovered what we've discovered and paid with her life." My blood ran cold. What had started as a missing persons case was expanding into something much darker. "Tonight, after our vigil, we're leaving Oak Ridge," Sister Agnes stated firmly. "We've arranged safe passage with people we trust. We won't say where we're going, even in this recording. But know this, if you're listening, it means someone found this box, which means something went wrong with our plan." There was a pause, and I could hear the sisters whispering to each other, too low for the recorder to catch. Finally, Margaret spoke again. "We're leaving this in God's hands now. We've served Him faithfully our whole lives, and we must trust in His protection. But we're not naive, Detective Mitchell. We know the danger we're in. If you're hearing this, please find the truth. Not just for us, but for Clara, and for anyone else who may have been silenced." The recording continued with specific details about the financial records, names of individuals involved, and connections to Boston crime families that had been powerful in the 60s and 70s. I frantically scribbled notes, mapping connections and noting names I recognized from old case files. As the tape neared its end, I heard church bells chiming in the background. midnight. "Our vigil begins now," Sister Margaret said. "We'll pray for 3 hours, as we always do. Then we'll leave this place, perhaps forever. God be with you, Detective. And with us all." The recording ended with the soft sound of rosary beads clicking against each other, then silence. I sat back, overwhelmed by what I'd heard. The sisters hadn't just stumbled upon a secret. They'd uncovered a decades-long criminal operation with tentacles reaching into the highest levels of the Boston diocese. And they'd vanished immediately after making this recording. I reached for Sister Agnes's journal, wondering what additional evidence it might contain. As I opened it, a small newspaper clipping fell out. A death notice for Clara Jessup, dated September 18, 1973. The past was reaching out across 5 decades, demanding justice. My retirement would have to wait. I had a 17-year-old promise to keep. Sister Agnes's journal was bound in worn leather, its pages filled with precise handwriting that slanted sharply to the right. Unlike Sister Margaret's rounded, gentle script, Agnes's penmanship reflected her personality. Direct, meticulous, uncompromising. I carefully turned the fragile pages, aware that I might be the first person to read these words since they were written. The entries began on February 23, 2008, the day the sealed room was discovered during basement renovations. Agnes described how a construction worker had knocked through what appeared to be a relatively new section of wall, revealing a small chamber about 6 feet square. Inside, they found a metal lockbox welded shut, which the workers assumed contained historical church artifacts. Father Thomas asked Margaret and me to catalog the contents, Agnes wrote. He thought it might contain items for the church's bicentennial celebration next year. How I wish now that we had never opened it. The lockbox contained no religious artifacts, only financial ledgers, receipts, photographs, and letters spanning from 1967 to 1985. Agnes methodically documented everything, creating detailed logs of transactions that, when viewed together, painted a disturbing picture. "The church has been used as a washing machine," she wrote on March 4th. "Money comes in dirty from operations we can only guess at, gambling, prostitution, possibly worse, and goes out clean through construction projects, mission funds, and charitable donations. The genius is in its simplicity. Who questions a church about its finances?" Agnes had identified several key players. Bishop Robert Harrington, who had overseen the diocese since 1991, his predecessor Bishop James Cullen, 1979 to 1991, and Monsignor Vincent Falcone, who had served as diocesan financial administrator for nearly 30 years before his death in 2004. But the name that appeared most frequently was Anthony Castelli, a prominent Boston businessman with known ties to organized crime families. Castelli had been a major church benefactor, donating millions to building projects and restoration efforts across the diocese. According to Agnes's notes, these donations had provided the perfect cover for laundering vastly larger sums. "M is struggling with what we've discovered," Agnes wrote on March 15th. "Her faith remains unshaken. She says, the sins of men cannot tarnish the church herself. I wish I shared her certainty. I have served God faithfully for 42 years, but now I wonder how many of those years were spent unknowingly abetting criminals." The journal detailed their meeting with Bishop Harrington on March 20th. Agnes described his initial shock, followed by what she perceived as calculated damage control. He thanked us for bringing this historical matter to his attention and assured us he would handle it appropriately. When Margaret mentioned involving the police, his demeanor changed entirely. He reminded us of our vows of obedience and suggested that public scandal would only hurt the faithful. "The church has weathered worse storms," he said. "This must be handled internally." By early April, the sisters had begun noticing strange occurrences. Their mail appeared to have been opened and resealed. Twice, they returned to their convent room to find things subtly rearranged. A maintenance worker they'd never seen before was photographing the church archives where they'd been researching past employees. "We no longer feel safe discussing this at the convent," Agnes wrote on April 24th. "Today, we walked to Oak Ridge Park and sat by the duck pond to compare notes. We've decided to make copies of everything. M will hide one set, I another, and we'll place the original somewhere no one would think to look." The most disturbing entries concerned Clara Jessup, the young secretary who had died in 1973. Agnes had dug into newspaper archives and discovered that Clara had worked directly for Monsignor Falcone before her death. The official report stated she had jumped from the roof of her apartment building, but Agnes noted several inconsistencies. Clara had recently purchased a new car and enrolled in night classes at Boston College, she wrote. Her sister, interviewed after the death, stated repeatedly that Clara had been excited about the future. Yet 3 days before her death, she had requested an urgent meeting with Bishop Cullen. That meeting never took place. 2 weeks after her funeral, the diocese made a $25,000 payment to her family for emotional distress and continued spiritual support. An unusual action for a suicide. By early May, the sisters had compiled enough evidence to build a compelling case, but they were increasingly afraid. Agnes's final entries grew shorter, more cryptic. She noted license plate numbers of cars that followed them, and times when the convent phone line seemed to have strange clicks or delays. The last entry was dated May 16, 2008, the day they disappeared. "Tonight, we complete our regular vigil as if nothing is amiss. At 3 a.m., we will leave St. Catherine's forever. Our contact arrives at 3:30 at the east parking lot. M believes we are doing the right thing. I believe it is our only option now. May God forgive us if we are wrong and protect us in what lies ahead." At the bottom of the page, in handwriting that appeared more hurried, was a final line. "If anything happens, Detective Mitchell seems trustworthy. The rookie with the kind eyes. He listens when others only hear." I closed the journal, unexpectedly moved by Agnes's final assessment of my younger self. I had been just 28 then, eager to prove myself, with no idea how this case would define my career. Now I had names, details, and a clearer picture of what the sisters had uncovered. But the most pressing questions remained unanswered. What had happened after 3 a.m. that night? Where had they gone? And after 17 years, were Sisters Margaret and Agnes still alive? I emerged from Warren's office after 3 hours with a yellow legal pad filled with notes and a mind racing with possibilities. The chief was waiting outside, leaning against the wall with 2 cups of coffee in hand. He passed one to me without a word, understanding that I needed the caffeine as much as the gesture of support. "Well?" he asked finally, as I took a grateful sip. "It's bigger than we thought," I replied. "Much bigger. The sisters didn't just vanish. They were running from something. Something tied to organized crime. Money laundering through the diocese, possibly even murder." Warren's eyebrows shot up. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, then immediately crossed himself. Old Catholic habits die hard. "You're sure about this?" I nodded. Their own words, Warren, detailed records, names, dates. They were planning to leave after their vigil that night. Someone was supposed to pick them up at 3:30 a.m. Either they never made it to that meeting, or whoever was waiting wasn't who they expected. Warren finished grimly. "I need to officially reopen this case," I said. I know I'm retired, but Warren cut me off. Say no more. I'll deputize you as a special investigator. God knows our department doesn't have the experience for something like this. But Mitchell, he added, lowering his voice, if what you're saying is true, we're talking about powerful people. After 17 years, some of them might still be around. Bishop Harrington is still heading the diocese, I confirmed. And Anthony Castelli is very much alive. At 82, he's still considered untouchable in Boston. The name caused Warren to pale visibly. Everyone in Massachusetts law enforcement knew the Castelli family, even if they'd never been able to make charges stick. We need to be careful how we proceed, I said. First, I want to verify everything in the sisters' records. Then, we locate their contact, whoever was supposed to pick them up that night. And we need to find Clara Jessup's family. If there was a payoff, they might know more than they've ever told. Warren nodded. What do you need from me? Access to the original case files, a quiet place to work, and absolute discretion. If word gets out that we're reopening this with new evidence. Understood, Warren said. The conference room is yours for as long as you need it. I'll have all the files brought up from storage. By noon, I had transformed the conference room into an investigation headquarters. The walls were soon covered with photographs, timelines, and maps. Case boxes lined the table, their contents spread out in chronological order. I was particularly interested in the canvassing reports from 2008, interviews with everyone who lived within sight of St. Catherine's. One report caught my attention, an interview with Eliza Winters, an elderly insomniac who lived across from the church. She had reported seeing a black sedan parked near the east lot around 3 a.m. on the night in question. The interviewing officer had noted it as likely unrelated since the church security footage didn't show the nuns leaving the building. I checked my watch. If Mrs. Winters was still alive, she'd be well into her 90s now. Still, it was worth checking. A quick search confirmed she was indeed still living at the same address, now with a caregiver. I called ahead, explaining who I was and asking if I could stop by regarding an old case. Her caregiver, Maria, sounded hesitant but agreed after I assured her the visit would be brief. Mrs. Winters' home was a small Victorian across from St. Catherine's eastern edge. From her front windows, she had a clear view of the church grounds, including the parking lot mentioned in the Sisters' Journal. Maria answered the door and led me to a sunroom where Mrs. Winters sat in a recliner, a blanket over her knees despite the room's warmth. She was tiny now, her once tall frame diminished by age, but her eyes were sharp and alert as they tracked my movement into the room. "Detective Mitchell," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "I remember you. You were so young then, so serious about those poor nuns." I smiled, touched that she remembered. "I'm a bit older now, Mrs. Winters, but still serious about finding the truth." "You've found something," she stated rather than asked. "After all this time?" I explained about the janitor's discovery, careful not to reveal too many details. "I'm particularly interested in what you saw that night. The black sedan you mentioned in your statement." Mrs. Winters nodded slowly. "They didn't believe me, you know, said their cameras didn't show the sisters leaving. But I know what I saw." "And what exactly was that?" I pressed gently. Her gaze drifted to the window, toward the church spire visible above the trees. It was a Lincoln Town car, black, with tinted windows. It pulled into the east lot at exactly 3:17 a.m. I remember because I'd just taken my pills and checked the clock. It idled there for about 20 minutes, then drove away. "Did you see anyone get in or out of the car?" She shook her head. "Too dark. But there was something else I didn't tell those young officers back then. She leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. About a week before, I saw that same car, same time of night, and I got a look at the driver when he stepped out to smoke. A big man, Italian-looking, with a scar along his jaw. My pulse quickened. Did you ever see him again after the nuns disappeared? No, she said. But 2 days after they vanished, men in suits came to the church. Important-looking men. They went inside with Father Thomas for hours. When they came out, Father looked broken somehow. He was never the same after. I made careful notes, thanked Mrs. Winters for her time, and left with a new lead to pursue. Father Thomas had retired years ago, but a quick check confirmed he was still living at a retirement home for priests in Worcester. As I drove back to the station, my phone rang. It was Warren. "Mitchell, you need to get back here now," he said, his voice tense. "Bishop Harrington just showed up with his lawyer. Says he heard we're reopening the case and wants to cooperate fully. But Mitchell, ... He paused. "He's asking for immunity, says he's ready to tell us everything about what happened to Sisters Margaret and Agnes." The case was breaking open faster than I'd anticipated. After 17 years of silence, suddenly everyone wanted to talk. The question was, why now? And how much of what the bishop had to say would be the truth? I found Bishop Robert Harrington waiting in the interview room, a space that hadn't changed since my days on the force. Same scuffed table, same uncomfortable chairs, same outdated recording equipment. The years hadn't been kind to Harrington. At 78, he was gaunt, his once imposing frame diminished, his clerical collar looking too large for his thin neck. Beside him sat a younger man in an expensive suit, Gregory Pell, one of Boston's top criminal defense attorneys. Not the kind of legal representation one would expect for a cooperative witness. Chief Warren and I entered together, and I was struck by the flash of recognition in Harrington's eyes when he saw me. A mixture of resignation and what might have been relief. "Detective Mitchell," he said, his voice raspier than I remembered. "I'd heard you were back on the case. Perhaps it's divine providence." Warren set up the recording equipment while I took a seat across from Harrington. "Before we begin, Bishop, I want to be clear. We haven't offered any immunity deal. That would require the district attorney's involvement." Pell leaned forward. "My client understands that. However, he's prepared to provide valuable information regarding the disappearance of Sisters Margaret and Agnes. We're hoping his cooperation will be taken into consideration." I nodded, then addressed Harrington directly. "We found the box the sisters left behind. We know about the financial records, the connections to the Castelli family, and about Clara Jessup." Something flickered in Harrington's eyes, surprise, perhaps, that we had discovered so much. He glanced at his lawyer, who nodded slightly. "Then you know why they were in danger," Harrington said quietly. "Why they needed to disappear." Warren started the recording, stating the date, time, and all persons present. Then I began the formal questioning. "Bishop Harrington, what can you tell us about the night of May 16th, 2008, when Sisters Margaret and Agnes disappeared from St. Catherine's Church?" Harrington folded his hands on the table. "They didn't disappear, Detective. They escaped, and I helped them do it." The admission hung in the air for a moment before I recovered. "You helped them escape? From whom?" "From Anthony Castelli and his associates," Harrington replied. "When the sisters came to me with what they'd found, I initially tried to contain the situation. I was afraid, not just for the church's reputation, but for their safety and my own." He described how he'd contacted Castelli, hoping to negotiate a quiet resolution. I believed I could convince him that these were old sins, best left buried. I was a fool. His voice cracked slightly. Castelli made it clear that loose ends weren't acceptable, regardless of who they were. 2 elderly nuns meant nothing to him. So, what changed? I asked. Why did you decide to help them? Harrington looked down at his hands. Conscience, detective. Something I'd neglected for too long. When Sister Margaret spoke about Clara Jessup, a young woman I'd never even heard of, I realized this corruption had claimed lives before. I couldn't have more blood on the church's hands. On my hands. According to Harrington, he secretly arranged for the sisters to enter a witness protection program of sorts, but not a governmental one. Using church connections, he contacted a network of monasteries and convents that had helped hide people before. Political refugees, domestic violence victims, witnesses at risk. I arranged for someone to pick them up after their vigil. Brother Michael from the Trappist monastery near Albany. He was to drive them to a convent in Montreal as the first stop. From there, they would move further, their identities changed, their histories erased. Did they make it to Montreal? I asked, hardly daring to hope. Harrington nodded. They did. I received confirmation through secure channels, but that's the last I heard. The agreement was that I would never know their final location, for their safety and mine. And you never reported any of this to the police? Warren interjected, unable to keep the anger from his voice. I couldn't, Harrington insisted. Castelli had connections everywhere, including law enforcement. No offense, Chief Warren, but in 2008 your predecessor was on Castelli's payroll. The accusation stunned us both. Former Chief Riley had been a respected figure in Oak Ridge. That's a serious allegation, I said carefully. Check his finances, Harrington replied. His children's private school tuitions, the vacation home in Maine, the boat, all beyond a police chief's salary. I made a note to follow up on this claim, then returned to the main subject. If the sisters escaped safely, why are you coming forward now, after 17 years? Harrington exchanged glances with his lawyer again. Because Anthony Castelli is dying. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. He has weeks, maybe days. His son Michael is taking over the family operations and he's cleaning house. Eliminating anyone who knows about past indiscretions. Including you, I guessed. Harrington nodded. I received a visit last week from one of Michael's men. He made it clear that my retirement was being arranged. That's when I knew I had to come forward. Not just about the sisters, but everything. The decades of money laundering, the payoffs, the cover-ups. For the next hour, Harrington provided details that matched much of what was in Sister Agnes's journal, plus additional information about operations continuing well past 2008. He named police officers, judges, and politicians who had been compromised. He described how the scheme had evolved over time, becoming more sophisticated as banking regulations changed. When we finally paused the recording, Harrington looked exhausted, but somehow lighter, as if unburdened. "There's one more thing," he said, as we were preparing to conclude. "Something not in any records, something the sisters couldn't have known. It's about Clara Jessup." I sat back down, giving him my full attention. "She didn't commit suicide," Harrington said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She was murdered on Monsignor Falcone's orders. I discovered this years later, after Falcone died. She had evidence of the laundering operation, photographic evidence of cash deliveries, meetings between Castelli and church officials. She threatened to go to the Boston Globe." "How do you know this?" I asked. "Falcone kept files. Insurance, he called it. After his death, they came to me as his successor. Clara's file included photographs of her body before it was discovered as a suicide. She was already dead when they took her to the roof." I felt a chill run through me. Do these files still exist? Harrington nodded. My lawyer has them in secure storage. They're part of what I'm offering in exchange for protection. As the interview concluded, I was left with a swirl of emotions. Relief that the sisters might still be alive, disgust at the decades of corruption, and a growing determination to see this through to the end. Not just for Sisters Margaret and Agnes, but for Clara Jessup and anyone else who had been silenced. As Warren escorted Harrington and his lawyer out to arrange formal statements with the district attorney, I returned to the conference room and added new elements to my timeline. One question kept nagging at me. If Bishop Harrington was telling the truth, and the sisters had safely escaped, why had they left the box under the pew? Why create a time capsule of evidence if they were already safe? Something wasn't adding up, and I wouldn't rest until I knew what it was. The next morning, I was on a flight to Montreal. Bishop Harrington had provided the name of the convent where Sisters Margaret and Agnes had initially been taken, Our Lady of Perpetual Peace, located in a quiet suburb outside the city. Warren had arranged for Canadian authorities to be notified of my unofficial visit, though I had no jurisdiction there. Snow was falling heavily when I landed, coating the city in a blanket of white that seemed fitting for my search for two women who had vanished into a different kind of whiteness, the anonymity of witness protection. I rented a car and navigated the slippery roads to the convent, an imposing stone building surrounded by bare trees and snow-covered gardens. Mother Superior Gabrielle received me in a small, warmly lit office. She was younger than I expected, perhaps in her 50s, with intelligent eyes and a direct manner that reminded me of Sister Agnes. "I've been authorized to speak with you about this matter," she said, after I presented my credentials and explained my purpose. "Though there's not much I can tell you." "So they were here?" I asked, hope rising in my chest. She nodded. "Briefly, in May of 2008, they arrived under different names, Sisters Elizabeth and Catherine. We were told only that they needed sanctuary before moving on to their final destination. Did they tell you anything about why they were running? Or where they went next?" Mother Gabrielle shook her head. "They shared very little. They seemed traumatized, especially the older one. Sister Elizabeth, though I now know she was actually Sister Margaret. She had nightmares called out in her sleep." "How long did they stay here?" I asked, taking notes as we spoke. "Just under 2 weeks," Mother Gabrielle replied, folding her hands on the desk. "Brother Michael brought them to us on May 17th, and they departed on May 29th. They were meant to stay longer, but there was an incident that accelerated their departure." My pen stopped moving. "What kind of incident?" "A man came looking for them. He claimed to be from the Boston Diocese. Said he had important papers for 2 visiting American nuns." Her expression darkened. "We didn't confirm or deny their presence, of course. We're experienced with protecting those in our care. But later that day, Sister Agnes, forgive me, Sister Catherine as we knew her, spotted the same man watching the convent from a car across the street. The chill I felt had nothing to do with the Canadian winter. They were found." Mother Gabrielle nodded grimly. "We moved them that night. Brother Michael returned and took them to what was supposed to be their final destination, a remote monastery in northern Quebec, Saint-Jérôme-des-Neiges. It's isolated, accessible only by a single road that's often impassable in winter. We thought they would be safe there." "And were they?" I pressed, trying to keep the urgency from my voice. She hesitated. "I received confirmation of their arrival. After that, according to protocol, there was to be no further contact." She paused, then added reluctantly, "But 6 months later, I heard through church channels that there had been a fire at Saint-Jérôme. The official report called it an accident. a kitchen fire that spread quickly through the old wooden structures. My stomach tightened. Were there casualties? 2 sisters who had recently joined the community, she said softly. Their bodies were too badly burned for identification beyond dental records, which were sent from Boston. The implication was clear. You believe it was them, Margaret and Agnes. I had my suspicions, she admitted. The timing, the circumstances, but I had no proof, and it wasn't my place to question. But now you're telling me, I noted. Why? Mother Gabrielle reached into her desk drawer and removed a small envelope. Because of this. It arrived 3 years after the fire, with no return address, postmarked from Alberta. Inside was a simple Christmas card with a picture of the Montreal skyline. The message inside read only, "Still praying. Still grateful." M and A. You believe they're alive, I said, studying the card carefully. I believe at least one of them survived, she replied. And I've kept this to myself all these years, waiting for someone to come asking the right questions. She allowed me to photograph the card before I left, promising to forward any additional information if she found it. As I drove back to the airport, I called Warren with an update. So, we have conflicting scenarios, he summarized. Either they died in that fire, which might have been deliberately set, or they survived and went even deeper into hiding. There's a third possibility, I said, watching snowflakes melt on my windshield. What if only one of them survived? The card says M and A, but that could be out of habit or to maintain their cover. Where to next? Warren asked. Saint-Jérôme-des-Neiges. I need to see the fire report. Talk to anyone who was there that night. Mitchell, Warren's voice lowered. Things are happening here. Castelli's son Michael has been asking questions about your investigation, and Bishop Harrington has been moved to a safe house after a suspicious car was spotted outside his residence. Keep him safe, I urged. His testimony is crucial. There's more, Warren continued. We found Clara Jessup's sister, Patricia Moreno, married name. She's still in Massachusetts, living in Worcester. Says she's been waiting 17 years for someone to ask the right questions about her sister's death. Another thread to follow. I'll fly back tomorrow, set up a meeting with her for the day after. Be careful up there, Mitchell. If the Castelli family has eyes in Boston, they might have them in Canada too. I assured him I would watch my back, but as I navigated the snowy roads to my hotel, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I took extra precautions, changing my route several times, parking at a different hotel than the one I'd booked, entering through a service entrance. In my room, I spread out my notes on the bed, adding the new information from Mother Gabrielle. The timeline was taking shape, but crucial pieces were still missing. Why had the sisters left evidence behind at St. Catherine's if they were planning a managed escape? Why hadn't they retrieved it once they were safe? And if they had survived the fire, where had they been for the past 14 years? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. Stop digging, detective. Some graves should remain undisturbed. Someone knew where I was, and they were watching. The monastery of Saint-Jérôme-des-Neiges appeared through my windshield like something from another century. A collection of stone and wooden buildings nestled in a valley surrounded by snow-covered pines. The main structure had been rebuilt after the fire, its newer materials standing in stark contrast to the weathered stones of the surviving buildings. I had driven 3 hours north of Montreal on increasingly remote roads, following the GPS until it lost signal, then relying on printed directions provided by the provincial police, who had been surprisingly cooperative after hearing my story. Sister Monique, who had been at Saint-Jérôme for over 30 years, met me at the entrance. She was bundled in a heavy coat over her habit, her breath visible in the frigid air. "Not many visitors make it here in winter," she said, leading me toward the main building. "Especially not American detectives interested in old fires." Inside, the monastery was austere but warm, heated by wood-burning stoves that gave the air a pleasant, smoky scent. We settled in a small room with a table and simple wooden chairs. A window overlooked the courtyard where the original structure had stood before the fire. "I was here that night," Sister Monique began without preamble. November 12, 2008, it was already snowing heavily, our first major storm of the season. The fire started just after midnight in what was then our kitchen wing. She described being awakened by smoke, the confusion as the sisters tried to evacuate through the blinding snow. We were 23 sisters here at that time. 21 made it out. "The 2 who died," I said carefully. "They were new to your community?" Sister Monique nodded. "Sisters Elizabeth and Catherine. They had arrived in May from the United States. We were told they were transferring from a Boston diocese due to health concerns. The quiet and clean air here was supposed to help them. The aliases matched what Mother Gabriel had told me." "Did you interact with them much during their time here?" "They kept to themselves," she replied. "Sister Elizabeth taught music to the novices. Sister Catherine worked in our archives. Both attended services faithfully, but they rarely joined community activities beyond their duties." "Did anything unusual happen before the fire? Visitors? Phone calls?" Sister Monique considered this. "A week before the fire, a man came. He said he was from the Boston diocese, checking on their welfare." Her eyes narrowed at the memory. I didn't believe him. His questions were too probing, and he was too interested in their routines when they were alone. "What did you tell him?" "Very little. We are protective of our own." But that same night I overheard the sisters arguing. Catherine wanted to leave, said they had been found, that it wasn't safe. Elizabeth insisted they had nowhere else to go. This aligned with the personalities I'd come to know through their recordings and writings. Agnes, the pragmatist, always alert to danger; Margaret, the optimist, trusting in their sanctuary. "The fire investigator ruled it an accident," I noted. "Do you believe that?" Sister Monique's silence was answer enough. "The kitchen was locked at night," she finally said. "Someone would have needed a key to enter, and the fire spread unusually quickly, as if it had multiple points of origin. But the inspector said the evidence was inconclusive due to the extensive damage. And the bodies, unrecognizable," she said softly. "Found in the sisters' quarters. Dental records were sent from Boston for confirmation, though I always wondered how they obtained those records so quickly. I made a mental note to check who had requested those dental files." "Is there anything else you remember? Any detail that seemed off at the time?" Sister Monique hesitated. "There is one thing. 2 days after the fire, when we were still in shock, still mourning, I went to their quarters to collect any salvageable belongings. Their room was mostly destroyed, but in a drawer that had been partially protected from the flames, I found this." From her pocket, she withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. Unfolding it revealed a simple silver cross on a chain, tarnished but intact. "It belonged to Sister Elizabeth, Margaret, as you call her. She never took it off, not even to sleep. So how was it in her drawer during the fire?" I examined the necklace carefully. The chain was intact, showing no signs of having been broken or forcibly removed. "May I?" I asked, and Sister Monique nodded, allowing me to take the cross. Turning it over, I noticed tiny initials engraved on the back. M.D. Margaret Donahue. "Did you report finding this to anyone?" "Only to Mother Superior. She said to keep it safe, that perhaps Sister Elizabeth had removed it before bed that night, but I've never been convinced. I photographed the cross from several angles before returning it to Sister Monique. This could be important evidence that at least Sister Margaret wasn't in that fire. That's why I've kept it all these years, she admitted. Something about those deaths never felt right. Before leaving, I asked to see the rebuilt area where the fire had occurred and the cemetery where the remains of the two sisters had been buried. Sister Monique led me through the snow to two simple granite markers side by side. Sister Elizabeth, 1942 to 2008. Sister Catherine, 1938 to 2008. I stood silently before the graves, wondering if I was paying respects to Sisters Margaret and Agnes, or to two empty caskets in a staged tragedy. The dates were right, but something felt wrong. The same wrongness that had haunted this case from the beginning. As I prepared to leave, Sister Monique pressed the silver cross into my hand. Take it. Perhaps it will lead you to the truth. That's what we all want, isn't it? Even after all this time. I drove back toward Montreal as darkness fell, the cross in my pocket feeling heavier than its actual weight. In my hotel room that night, I called Warren with an update. I've got the fire investigator's contact information, I told him. And I'm having the provincial police pull all records related to the identification of the bodies. But Warren, I'm increasingly convinced that at least one of the sisters survived that fire. Then where has she been for 14 years? He asked. And why resurface now? I don't think they, or she, did resurface, I replied. I think they've been in hiding all this time, believing they were still in danger. And they were right. The threat never went away, it just got quieter. Until the box was found, Warren finished my thought. Exactly. Somehow, word got out about the janitor's discovery. That's why Bishop Harrington came forward when he did. That's why I got that warning text. The past isn't done with us yet. After hanging up, I examined the silver cross again under the hotel lamp. Something about it nagged at me. Not just its existence, but its condition. It showed tarnish consistent with years of storage, not the smoke damage one would expect from a fire. I turned it over in my fingers, thinking about Sister Margaret, who, according to Sister Monique, never removed this cross. Would she have taken it off the night of the fire? Or had she already fled, leaving it behind as another breadcrumb for someone to follow? As I placed the cross on the nightstand, my phone chimed with an email. It was from the provincial police, containing scanned copies of the dental records used to identify the bodies. The originating request had come from Bishop Harrington himself, who had claimed the records were needed for sisters transferring to a remote location with limited medical facilities. The paper trail was starting to make sense. Harrington had helped them escape, then helped fake their deaths when they were discovered. But the Christmas card sent years later suggested at least one of them had survived and established a new life somewhere in Western Canada. Tomorrow I would return to Massachusetts to speak with Clara Jessup's sister. Perhaps she could provide another piece of this increasingly complex puzzle. But as I drifted off to sleep, one question continued to haunt me. If Sisters Margaret and Agnes had successfully disappeared, why leave behind evidence that could endanger not only themselves, but everyone who had helped them? Unless they had never intended to disappear at all. Patricia Moreno lived in a modest ranch house in Worcester, about 40 minutes west of Boston. At 68, she had the same delicate features evident in the few photographs I'd seen of her sister Clara, though grief and time had etched deeper lines around her eyes and mouth. She welcomed me with cautious hospitality, serving coffee in her small living room where family photos covered nearly every surface. A life documented in snapshots of children, grandchildren, holidays, and graduations. Among them, I noticed several pictures of a young woman with a bright smile and intelligent eyes, frozen in the early 1970s. Clara Jessup, forever 23 years old. "I've waited a long time for someone to ask the right questions," Patricia said, settling into an armchair across from me. "When that police chief called yesterday, I almost couldn't believe it." "You never believed your sister committed suicide," I said. It wasn't a question. "Never," she said firmly. Clara loved life. She had plans, college classes, a trip to Europe she'd been saving for. 2 days before she died, she helped me plan my wedding. Does that sound like someone planning to jump off a building? I shook my head. "Tell me about Clara's job at the diocese." Patricia's expression darkened. She was so proud of that position, executive secretary to Monsignor Falcone, who handled all the finances. Clara was good with numbers. She could spot patterns, inconsistencies. That's why they hired her. And when did things change? About 3 months before her death. She became anxious, distracted. She'd check to make sure she wasn't being followed when she visited me. Once, she brought a file home from work and stayed up all night making copies of documents. "Did she tell you what was in those documents?" Patricia nodded slowly. "Not in detail, but she said the church was being used to clean dirty money. That important men were involved, dangerous men. She was gathering evidence, planning to take it to a reporter at the Boston Globe." "What happened to those copies after she died?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral despite my growing excitement. Patricia rose and left the room briefly, returning with a battered shoebox. "I kept them. All these years, I kept them, even after they paid us to stay quiet." Inside the box were photocopied financial records, remarkably similar to what Sisters Margaret and Agnes had discovered decades later, along with several photographs. The black and white images showed men in clerical garb meeting with others in expensive suits, exchanging briefcases in church parking lots, shaking hands in what appeared to be private offices. "Clara took these herself," Patricia explained. "She had a camera with a telephoto lens. Said she needed proof no one could deny. One photo in particular caught my attention. A clear shot of a younger Anthony Castelli, standing beside Monsignor Falcone, both men smiling as they stood in front of St. Catherine's Church. The date stamp on the back read September 1973, just weeks before Clara's death. "The police ruled it suicide," Patricia continued bitterly. "Said she was under work stress, that she'd been acting erratically. They barely investigated. Then the diocese came with their condolence payment and their suggestions that Clara had been mentally unstable. But you never believed it." "I knew my sister was murdered," she said, her voice hardening. "But we were a working-class family with no connections. The church was powerful. The police weren't interested. Eventually, I put these away and tried to move on with my life. But I never forgot. I carefully examined each document, each photograph, finding names that connected directly to the evidence the nuns had discovered. Mrs. Moreno, this is incredibly valuable. With your permission, I'd like to take these as evidence," she nodded. "Take them, use them, get justice for Clara, and for those nuns if you can. It's all connected, isn't it?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Your sister found evidence of criminal activity within the church. 35 years later, Sisters Margaret and Agnes discovered the same operation was still ongoing. All 3 women were silenced, though in different ways." "Do you think the nuns are still alive?" she asked. "I believe at least one of them might be," I said cautiously. "And if so, she might finally be ready to come forward." As I prepared to leave, Patricia stopped me at the door. "Detective, there's something else." After Clara died, I received a few anonymous phone calls. A woman saying she knew the truth about my sister, that she was gathering evidence that someday the truth would come out. The last call came in 2008, just before those nuns disappeared. She said, "It's happening again, but this time we're ready." I always wondered if it was one of them. The timing aligned perfectly with Sisters Margaret and Agnes discovering the evidence. It could have been Sister Agnes, I suggested. She was researching past cases connected to the financial records. "Whoever it was," Patricia said, "I've prayed for them every day since." I hope they succeeded where Clara couldn't. I drove back to Oak Ridge with the shoebox beside me, a treasure trove of evidence that connected a 47-year-old murder to a 17-year-old disappearance. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was still incomplete. Back at the station, Warren was waiting with news of his own. Bishop Harrington has agreed to full cooperation in exchange for witness protection. The DA is on board. And there's something else. Anthony Castelli died this morning. The timing seemed too convenient to be coincidental. "Natural causes?" "Supposedly," Warren replied. But his son Michael has already made moves to consolidate power. Word on the street is he's eliminating loose ends. Anyone who knows about the old operations. Which makes our witnesses even more vulnerable, I said, and potentially more willing to come forward now that the elder Castelli is gone. I showed Warren the evidence from Patricia Moreno, and we spent hours organizing it alongside the nuns' records, creating a comprehensive timeline of a criminal enterprise spanning nearly 5 decades. As midnight approached, Warren finally left for home, but I remained, staring at the wall of evidence, searching for the missing link that would tell me where to look next. My phone rang, an unknown number. Despite my better judgment, I answered. "Detective Mitchell." The voice was elderly, female, with a slight tremor. "Who is this?" I asked, though somehow I already knew. "You found my cross at Saint-Jérôme," she said. "Sister Monique called to tell me. You've been following our breadcrumbs all along, just as we hoped someone would." My heart pounded. "Sister Margaret?" "Yes," she confirmed. "I'm alive, Detective. Agnes isn't. She died 3 years ago of natural causes. But I'm ready to come home now, ready to testify. Anthony Castelli is dead, and it's finally time for the truth." "Where are you?" I asked, already reaching for a pen. "Alberta," she replied. "A small town called Redemption Valley. Rather fitting, don't you think? I've been teaching at the parish school under a different name." "I'll come to you," I offered immediately. "No," she said firmly. "I'm already on my way. I'll be in Boston tomorrow evening. But Detective, be careful. Michael Castelli is more dangerous than his father ever was. He won't let this story come to light without a fight." After she hung up, I sat in stunned silence. Sister Margaret was alive and coming home. After 17 years in hiding, she was ready to tell her story, to provide the final piece of the puzzle that had consumed my career. I called Warren with the news, then began making arrangements for Sister Margaret's safe arrival. Tomorrow would bring the culmination of this long journey, but also potentially its greatest danger. Boston's South Station was crowded with evening commuters when I arrived to meet Sister Margaret's train. Warren had arranged for plainclothes officers to be stationed throughout the terminal, watchful but inconspicuous. Despite these precautions, I felt exposed, scanning every face for potential threats. Margaret had described what she would be wearing: a blue coat and gray scarf, not the habit she'd worn for most of her life. I wondered how much she had changed in 17 years. Would I recognize the woman from the photographs, or had time and trauma transformed her completely? The Montreal train arrived precisely on schedule. passengers began streaming onto the platform, reuniting with waiting friends and family, hailing taxis, hurrying toward connections. I watched each face carefully, my hand instinctively close to my concealed weapon. Then I saw her, smaller than I remembered from photographs. Her once dark hair now completely white, but with the same gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She carried only a small suitcase, moving cautiously through the crowd, searching the faces just as I was. Our eyes met across the terminal. A flicker of recognition passed between us. Two people connected by a mystery that had defined both our lives. I moved toward her, maintaining a casual pace while continuing to scan our surroundings. "Sister Margaret," I said quietly when I reached her. "Just Margaret now," she corrected with a small smile. "I haven't been Sister Margaret for a very long time." I escorted her to a waiting car, hyper-aware of every person we passed, every vehicle in the vicinity. Only when we were safely moving through Boston traffic did I begin to relax slightly. "You've been following our trail," Margaret said, looking out at the city streets, "just as we hoped someone would." "The box under the pew," I confirmed. "Sister Agnes's journal, the recording. But there's something I don't understand. If you were planning to escape that night, why leave them behind? Why create a time capsule of evidence when you were already going to safety?" Margaret turned to look at me directly. "Because we never intended to disappear forever, Detective. Only until it was safe to return. The evidence was our insurance policy, and our way to ensure the truth would eventually come out, even if we couldn't tell it ourselves." "But 17 years, I said. "Why so long? It wasn't supposed to be," she admitted. "Our original plan was to stay hidden for a year, maybe 2, until the evidence could be properly investigated. But when we reached Montreal, we learned how far Castelli's influence extended. The man who found us there. He was a former police officer on Castelli's payroll. We realized then that no official channels were safe." "So, you went deeper underground," I said, understanding dawning. "All the way to Saint-Jérôme." Margaret nodded. "Brother Michael helped us create new identities within the church, a system that's existed for centuries to protect those in danger. But even there, we weren't safe. A week before the fire, Agnes spotted one of Castelli's men in the nearby town. We knew they had found us again." "The fire wasn't an accident," I stated. "No," she confirmed grimly. "It was meant for us. But we had already fled, warned by Sister Monique about the man asking questions. We left in the night 2 days before the fire, leaving some of our belongings behind to maintain the illusion we were still there." "Who died in that fire?" I asked, the question that had haunted me since Montreal. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "No one was supposed to die. The fire was set in the kitchen wing, away from sleeping quarters, but 2 novices had switched rooms that night due to a leak in their ceiling. They were collateral damage. Their deaths haunt me still." The weight of that knowledge was visible in her posture, in the way her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "After that, we couldn't risk coming forward," she continued. "Those innocent women had died because of us. And if Castelli would burn down a monastery to silence us, what else would he do? Who else would be hurt? So we disappeared completely. New names, new appearances, new lives in a place where no one would think to look for elderly nuns." "Redemption Valley, Alberta," I said. She nodded. "A small town that needed teachers. I taught music. Agnes taught history. We lived quietly, attending a different church, never speaking of our past. When Agnes fell ill 3 years ago, she made me promise to wait until after Anthony Castelli died to come forward. She believed his son might be different, might not pursue us with the same vengeance. she was wrong about that, I said carefully. Michael Castelli is eliminating connections to his father's operations. I know, Margaret said, which is why it's even more important that I testify now, before more people are hurt. I have evidence that even Agnes didn't know about. Records I've kept all these years, duplicates of everything we found, plus additional material I've gathered through church connections. We arrived at the safe house Warren had arranged, a nondescript apartment in Cambridge secured by federal marshals. As Margaret settled in, I briefed her on everything we'd learned, from Bishop Harrington's confession to Clara Jessup's sister and her preserved evidence. "It's all coming together," Margaret said, a hint of wonder in her voice. "After all this time, Clara can finally have justice." "You all can," I assured her. Over the next 3 days, Margaret provided detailed statements to federal prosecutors. Bishop Harrington did the same from his own safe house, and Patricia Moreno shared her sister's evidence. A case was being built that would shake the foundations of Boston's religious and criminal establishments alike. On the 4th day, as I arrived at Margaret's safe house, I found her sitting by the window, holding the silver cross Sister Monique had given me. "I never thought I'd see this again," she said softly. "I left it behind deliberately, you know. A piece of myself to remain at Saint-Jérôme in case I never made it back." "But you did make it back," I reminded her. "Yes," she agreed, looking up with clear eyes that held both sorrow and determination. "And now it's time to finish what we started. What Clara started all those years ago." 2 weeks later, Michael Castelli was indicted on multiple charges, including conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accessory to murder. Several current and former church officials faced charges related to money laundering and fraud. The case made national headlines, bringing to light a criminal enterprise that had operated in the shadows for nearly 5 decades. Margaret testified before a grand jury, her voice strong as she told the story of 2 nuns who had discovered corruption and refused to be silenced. When asked if she was afraid, knowing that powerful people still wished her harm, she responded with simple dignity. "The truth is more important than fear. Some lights cannot remain hidden under a bushel." On a crisp October morning, 1 month after Margaret's return, I accompanied her to St. Catherine's Church. It was her first visit since the night she and Agnes had fled 17 years earlier. The church was empty except for us, sunlight streaming through the stained glass, casting colorful patterns across the worn pews. Margaret walked slowly down the center aisle, her hand trailing along the wooden seats, until she reached pew 14, where Miguel had found the brass box that had started my journey back to this case. "Agnes wanted to be buried here," she said quietly, "next to Clara. She made me promise to bring her home when it was safe. We can arrange that," I assured her. Margaret knelt in the pew, her head bowed in prayer. I stood respectfully to the side, giving her the moment she needed in this place that had been both sanctuary and danger. After a time, she rose and turned to me with a peaceful expression. "It's finished now, Detective. The circle is complete." But I knew better. Cases like this are never truly finished. Their ripples continue long after the headlines fade, touching lives in ways we can't predict. Sisters Margaret and Agnes had left a legacy of courage that would inspire others to speak truth to power, to stand firm in the face of corruption. As for me, I had finally found the answers I'd sought for 17 years. The mystery that had defined my career was solved, but its impact would remain with me forever. A reminder that justice, though delayed, is never truly denied. Margaret took my arm as we walked back into the sunlight. 2 people forever connected by a box hidden under a pew, and the extraordinary story it had contained. "What will you do now?" I asked her. She smiled, looking toward the horizon. Live truthfully, Detective Mitchell. After all these years of hiding, that's the greatest freedom I can imagine. The end.